And afterwards, she did a PhD in biophysics in Stanford. Later, she was a postdoc in Roche. So she will talk about the potential of AI in clinic. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hope. And before I start, I would really like if you guys can raise your hand if you use AI at home every day. Yes, everybody? For your research? Everybody, great. Okay, so how many of you have studied on a course or taken a course about AI, deep learning, machine learning? Okay, so I'm going to try to give basic, but also some more deep details about algorithms that we are developing for the clinic. So in our lab, our goal is to gather everything we know about human beings, our exercise, what we eat, whether we sleep, our pollution, we use wearables, and we collect all this information to try to predict whether we will be healthy or not. We focus on health, what are the things that keep us healthy and which things have risk or make us prone to contract disease. So if we think about how AI can help doctors, we can have two different questions. One is, am I sick? Can AI tell me if I'm sick now? And this is about early diagnosis. Or we can ask ourselves whether I will be sick in the future, and this is about personalized risk. So in our lab, we work with very different data sets. For example, here we have tabular data from clinical trials. We have data from wearables. We have data from electrocardiogram, data from images, from ultrasound, magnetic resonance that we can leverage to do our analysis. And there are some data sets that I am very, very passionate about, which are the multimodal data sets. These contain data with different types, for example, images and language. Today, we can also leverage language together with images. And this language comes from the doctor writing our medical history. And this is very important and very useful as well. So I said before that we can calculate personalized risk. And in our lab, we work on different projects, for example, prevention of anxiety and depression. We work in liver fibrosis, survival of babies in the neonatology. And I'm really now, my last thing is working and leveraging data from sports medicine to predict, for example, injury in sports, elite sport people, athletes, or also in the general population. Sports medicine is really interesting because we can, for example, get data from populations at risk with disabilities or children or older people. And because sports and physical activity is so important for health, I think this is a very interesting area for work. But you can find more about this in our webpage, but I'm not talking about personalized risk today. I'm going to talk about diagnosis. So this talk will be structured in the following way. First, I'm going to talk about diagnosis and the fact that some people are not diagnosed fairly. And for that, I'm going to give an example on how we're using AI and machine learning to try to make diagnosis more fair. The second part of the talk is about deep learning and biomedical imaging, and I'm going to give you an example of how we analyze images to predict meningitis in babies. And at the end, I'm going to talk about my perspective. I want to share my views on the future and also the present of AI. Where is this going? Throughout this talk, I'm going to use some keywords. Explainability. AI needs to be explainable and trustworthy, especially in the medical realm. We want doctors and patients to trust our algorithms. And I'm going to give you some details and some explanations on how we use these algorithms to explain our AI models. So I'm going to talk about explainability to give us insights, to detect biases, and then about trust in these algorithms. So the first project I'm going to talk is about cardiovascular disease. And why I'm talking about disparities in this field? Because first, cardiovascular disease is responsible for 1/3 of the world's death. And most of this morbidity and mortality happens in lower income countries. Second, cardiovascular disease is traditionally considered a disease of men. It's traditionally considered a disease of men, but it's not. It's one of the main leading causes of death in women as well. And the reason why is that in 50% of the cases, women are misdiagnosed of cardiovascular disease. Can you imagine that? Every time a woman gets to the emergency care, half the time, the diagnosis of heart attack is incorrect. And that is why women have different symptoms to men. Sometimes we have chest pain like men, but sometimes we also feel tired, and it looks like the flu or like indigestion. Doctors used to say that women, we have atypical symptoms, but our symptoms are not atypical. These are the symptoms of the half of the other population of the world, right? So it's not atypical. It's just different to what the textbook in medicine says. So here, imagine the importance of this topic is that women arrive to the healthcare unit, they feel anxious, and then the doctor says, go home, take a Valium, and you will feel better. And this is really, really bad. So can AI make a difference? Can we use algorithms to diagnose more fairly? And this is what we are trying to do in our project. So we are leveraging data from electrocardiogram and working together with Hospital São Paulo. So our project of interest is detecting heart attack. So the heart needs oxygen to pump. When there is a blockage in one of the arteries, the heart starts to die. And this is very, very fast. It can take 1 to 2 hours for a heart attack to finally kill a person. So we say time is muscle. So what happens in the reality is that you get to the emergency care unit and it's really crowded. And as I've said before, if you're a woman, you are likely to go home with a Valium. So you may not receive care till the next day or the day after when you come back. So how can we change that? So most of the times in the emergency care units, you get an electrocardiogram. Electrocardiograms are almost everywhere. They are portable, they are cheap. But to be able to detect heart attack in an electrocardiogram, you have to be an expert cardiologist. So our hypothesis is, can we use AI to detect heart attack in the electrocardiogram automatically? So the electrocardiogram has 12 leads across your body. And you get an image like this. This is a PDF that you can take a picture, and then you can digitize the signal. It's also a long, 10-second long time series. For a data scientist, this is a signal that we can process, and we can extract features. And the features that we extract are many, many different features about the signal, but most of them are heart variability signals, and many others. So here we have the heart rate, the rhythm, the amplitude, the waveform, etc. But the problem doesn't end there. Not all heart attacks are created equal. So here we have a normal electrocardiogram, and here we have what we call STEMI, ST elevation myocardial infarction. You can see really that the signal down here, which is called the ST segment, is elevated. So an expert cardiologist sees that and he's like, or she's like, heart attack. And you have to receive attention between 1 to 2 hours. Otherwise, the heart completely ceases to receive oxygen, and the muscle dies. The problem comes here. This is very urgent, but these are urgent, and they are called non-ST elevation myocardial infarction. So you don't see elevation of the segment, but you see a depression. And many, many times, it looks normal. So these are the most difficult cases. Can an AI pick up all of these, the very urgent and the ones that can look normal? Because if that's true, then we don't need to have there an expert cardiologist on site. A nurse could take the electrocardiogram, which is what happens most of the times, and the algorithm can triage those patients that need urgent attention. So the good news is that we have analyzed the signal in this way, and we're using data from MIMIC-4, and we have actually very fair performance, not only in the easy STEMI heart attacks, but also the NSTEMI, and sometimes we can differentiate between the NSTEMI and non-STEMI. So for us, it's very important the sensitivity. Sensitivity means those patients that you are going to tell them you are not sick and you can go home. So if you have higher sensitivity, most of the patients that go home are healthy. So in medical AI, sensitivity, or what we call recall, is maybe one of the most important metrics that we look at for this type of early diagnosis algorithm. So for us, this is very interesting because we can see how can we use this technology in the future. But before I go to how can we use the technology, as I've said before, we need to explain this technology. Because somebody can say, oh, these curves are very nice, but what is there behind the algorithm? Are there biases in your data set? You need to explain us before we trust your algorithm. So machine learning doesn't need to be a black box anymore. It used to be, but not anymore. So there are a suite of algorithms called AI explainability, or XI, that are used to explain our models. And we really need to use them in every research work that is related to medicine. I just sometimes now that I review papers, I don't accept any paper that where the algorithm is not explained. I don't know what you guys, other professors think, but this is the best practice at the moment. So I'm going to give you an example of an AI explainability algorithm applied to our project. This is an algorithm that I very much like, which is called the SHAP algorithm. SHAP identifies the variables that are most informative in our prediction, but not only the variables themselves, but the sign of the variable. So here we have a lot of electrocardiographic measures ranked by importance, and a positive value of the variable is red. So now we know, for example, age is red to the right, means that older people are more likely to have NSTEMI. So this SHAP that I'm showing here is explaining the classification between healthy and NSTEMI. And there I can find, for example, that some of the higher metrics are the ST elevation, and the blue means that NSTEMI has a depressed ST elevation. So then I can work, for example, with the cardiologists, our partners, and we can see whether all these variables make sense. And in this case, most of them make sense. But later today, I'm going to show you some other examples when variables don't make sense, and they point to biases in the data. So for us, this is very exciting, because now we have technology, machine learning, that can look at an ECG and detect a heart attack. Can you imagine other conditions that we could detect in the electrocardiogram? So for us, this is very exciting. So now we would have a possibility to have someone come into emergency care room. We can digitalize the electrocardiogram, we can make a prediction, and then we can have an early intervention. I just wanted to mention one very interesting thing. When a patient comes to the emergency care room, there is a bias from the doctor. And as I've said before, the doctor tends to think that men are more likely to have a heart attack than women. But sex is not an important variable in the electrocardiogram. And this is very important because the electrocardiogram itself can produce a neutral, unbiased prediction. And most of the times, this doesn't happen in the clinic. So I wanted to finalize this part of topic or this case study, meaning that AI can help us and can help doctors to provide precise and efficient diagnoses that need to be validated and trustworthy towards equitable healthcare. So I hope that I have convinced you about this, and I'm going to pass to, before I pass to another one, I wanted to also mention that cardiovascular disease is not the only condition where there are biases. There are a lot of other conditions that are traditionally, or by prevalence, more likely to be men or women. So here, cardiovascular disease tends to be traditionally regarded more about men, but we also have autism, HDH, a stroke, alcoholism, Parkinson's, or gout, but there are women that also have all these conditions. In contrast, fibromyalgia, osteoporosis, depression, urinary infections, eating disorders, and breast cancer are thought to be disease of women, but they can also be disease of men. There is breast cancer also for men as well. So we hope to be able to create a lot of these algorithms that present unbiased diagnoses, and this is what our group is trying to develop at the moment. Then in the questions or at the coffee, we can discuss why these algorithms are not already present in the clinic, but all those complications we can discuss after. So now I'm going to switch topic to biomedical image analysis. I'm going to first give a briefing on deep learning. Most of you guys, this may be a refresher, and then I'm going to talk about ultrasound applications. So deep learning in a nutshell. This is a mammal neuron. Mammal neuron receives a lot of inputs. When these inputs add up to certain thresholds, the neuron fires, and this neuron is interconnected with other neurons in the brain. So same for, I forgot one slide, I'm sorry. Same for artificial neurons. So an artificial neuron collects a lot of inputs, numbers. They have weights. When these numbers add up, there is an activation function that produces an output. This is a piece of code. And these artificial neurons are collected, forming very deep networks. There are many different network architectures. In biomedicine, we use a lot the convolutional neural network. These are the simplest ones, the traditional ones. For example, this one points to ResNet 50, has 50 layers and 25 million parameters. We use convolutional neural networks for spatial tasks, just like image recognition. So if you have to analyze an image, detect objects, this is likely what we used to use. Now we are turning to use more transformers, but those require a lot of data. Then we have recurrent neural networks. I like to think that they loop back and they look back. So more outer layers communicate back to the inner layers, and the network refers to itself. We use these neural networks when we need to analyze sequential data. For example, text, translation, summarization, also music or forecast. And for one example of this recurrent neural network is Siri, with about 3 billion parameters. And then we have transformer architectures. These are more recent neural networks, just like ChatGPT. And we can see that they have trillion parameters for more complex tasks. And we now start to see some type or some amount of reasoning. And then we have DeepSeek, which came up this year, very exciting, because they managed, this Chinese company managed to make more with less. They have a series of experts, which are small transformers or smaller architectures that connect to each other. So information enters through a router. The router decides the type of task and assigns that task to the best expert that can perform the task. And at the end, there is an aggregator that collects all the information and provides it to us. So in this way, the network is saving a lot of effort because not all the experts are activated at the same time. I think this is fantastic. It shows how we can save a lot of resources. So for our task, we usually use convolutional neural networks. For object identification, classification, or for medical imaging, they work well. My approach is to use the simpler model before I turn to more complex models because they require less data and they tend to overfit less. And also, convolutional neural networks mimic the human brain. In our human brain, first we see an object with the retina, and then this object or this image activates the primary visual cortex, which looks at features, lines, and some basic shapes. Then there is secondary visual cortex, which interprets the color. And then the tertiary visual cortex understands rotations and translations. If I look at you like this, it is your tertiary visual cortex that will think that me, Paula, is Paula, even if I'm turning around. So neural networks work just like that. And this is a very nice paper that you see here where the neural network is trying to differentiate a face and a car. So we are going to print the content of each layer. So you see here that the primary visual cortex in humans or the outer layers look at the shapes. We don't know if it's a person or a car. But then as we move deeper in the network, we start to see some noses, some eyes, some eyebrows, the door of the car, more complex representations of the image, and finally, the outer layers can tell me face or can tell me car. So when we want to explain our results, we use the last convolutional layers to try to understand what the network is thinking. We plot them, we perform U-maps, and we characterize them, and we try to understand whether they are biases. So I'm going to talk about explainability in images as well. In images, we like to use an algorithm that is called GradCam. It looks at the gradient of the image, and we try to understand how the network is interpreting that image. So here we have a network that wants to predict whether it's a dog or a cat. And we clearly see the red means importance, that the network focuses the attention on the nose, I don't know if you call it nose, and the eyes of either the cat or the dog. The ears and the body seem pretty much not important or irrelevant. So here we understand, okay, it makes sense. But what about this? In this algorithm, the network is predicting young versus old. And then it's explaining why. It's funny because to predict young, it focuses at the smile. And then for old, at the glasses. Well, I understand that older people have less poor sight, myself included. But smile, I mean, I'm older and I smile. So do you most of the time, not all the time. But can somebody tell me why it's focusing on the smile?
That's maybe because when you get older, the face tends to, to fade downward.
I think so. Maybe because we don't want to have wrinkles and we just don't smile anymore. That can be normal. No.
It's whiter in that area. It seems that it's also the illumination.
Yes. No. What this algorithm does. It collects all the images and highlights the pixels that are informative of that prediction. So this shows a bias in the data set, means that they probably use Facebook, where the people, they use ImageNet and Facebook, and in most of the images, younger people are shown smiling, and older people are shown not smiling. But that doesn't mean that the smile is characteristic of older people or younger people. Everybody smiles. But this is a bias in the data set. And we use this a lot. We want to understand whether there is something wrong in our data set. We try to explain what the algorithm is trying to identify. And if you're more interested, you can look at this nice paper, because they report other biases in different data sets. That's why I always think that it's so important. Sometimes they have seen that algorithms that detect X-ray, right, very, very accurately, they find that they report very accurately because there is a mark by the doctor on one corner, like a cross, showing that that X-ray has cancer. And it's not the image itself, but it's a mark by the doctor. So it's very important that we actually do that in every project. So this is a nice paper. Then I can send you the references if you want to learn more about interpretable machine learning. It's online. So just to exemplify explainable AI in images, I'm going to talk about a very nice project where we are trying to detect meningitis in babies. And this is also about disparities. Meningitis is an excruciating disease in the developing countries. It happens when there is inflammation of the tissue in the brain of babies. This can be because of a virus or bacteria. And usually, there are epidemics across the world, but particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where there is an incidence of 1%. But when this happens, like, time is again muscle, or time is brain, because babies have few hours to be taken care of. So how is the standard of care for meningitis? It's really awful. It's a lumbar puncture in the spinal cord of the baby. So if the baby is not feeling well and one is not sure, like the doctor or the mom would not like the baby to have that. It's very invasive. So the question is, can we find a more non-invasive, cheaper way of predicting meningitis using AI? So in our lab, we are collaborating with a company here in Barcelona. It's really, I like them. They're very solid. And they have this very interesting machine. It's a portable ultrasound. It's like this size. So this ultrasound, this is the probe, can scan the brain of the baby, looking for white blood cells, lymphocytes, indicative of infection. So what they scan is the fontanelle of the baby here, and basically counting white blood cells. So we are doing that, and we are analyzing the images. I'm going to show you the images of this ultrasound. So there are two columns here, one with meningitis and one with healthy. Which of you think that, you see them, right? Which of you think that meningitis is this column? I'm going to tell you that the lower that you go in the column, the more white blood cells. So either of this one of these is really, baby is really, really bad condition. So which of ones they are to say that meningitis is this one? It's really impossible, right? So we can't do it by eye. We can't. At least I can't. And people in the company, they also can't, like the experts can't. So that's why we have developed a convolutional neural network to predict meningitis from the pictures. So we use a ResNet 50, fairly traditional neural network. It's nothing, I would say, sophisticated. We have few patients with meningitis and without meningitis. It's very difficult to collect this data. We are now validating anymore, but we have over 17 patients correctly classified. So then we have to ask, what is the algorithm doing? We need to explain. How are we going to trust this algorithm? So meningitis is the first column. And you see that the white blood cells count increases from 85 to 2,400. Actually, it's like we can't resolve it by eye. There is like no pattern. But the pattern is in the gradient. So if we apply GradCam, just like we did before, we can see the blobs. And if we look at the healthy ones, we see very few blobs. So the algorithm can detect changes in the gradient indicative of meningitis. It's really amazing. So before I started this project, I thought we would not be successful. I mostly engage in projects where I can see the signal by eye. Like with the electrocardiogram case, the cardiologists can tell by eye. Not the STEMI, but the STEMI they can. But here, I was very doubtful. And now I changed. Every time I start a new project, I see that this can happen. We sometimes cannot see what the AI can see. So one of, I think, the take-home message from this part of the talk is what is essential is invisible to the eyes, but maybe XI can help doctors see better. Can AI see better than the doctors? Could hospitals in the future do without the doctors? I'm going to leave it there. I don't think so. But we can discuss it in the last part of the talk. How much time do I have? 10 more minutes?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Well, round up. So just Kriba has a lot of different devices that we are working. We have different PhD projects. Meningitis is one of them, but we are also using this probe to detect white blood cells in the peritonitis dialysis bags or in the eyes for an eye condition called uveitis. So I really like this approach because the machine is portable. So I think this is still in development. And there are a lot of limitations to the device that we can discuss later. Now, let's get to the more philosophical part of the talk, the present and the future of AI. And these are all my views. So a few years ago, there has been a turning point. I think you guys remember AlphaFold and how it solved a 50-year-old problem by being able to fold the protein from the DNA sequence. A lot of people thought that structural biologists, that they would be without a job. They're still there and doing all right because we all adapt. In 2024, we had a very interesting Nobel Prize. On the physics side, we had a Nobel Prize for the people that are responsible or for the neural network discoveries or development. And for the chemistry side, we have the people and the scientists responsible for the software that folds these proteins. What this is telling us. So in 2021, we had AlphaFold and then the COVID pandemic. This was very important. A lot of software and a lot of technology and a lot of science was developed during this emergency. And right after, we had algorithms like Midjourney, Stable Diffusion models, ChatGPT, which are the beginners of the large language models. As we move on in time, we had ChatGPT-4, and interestingly, all the multimodal models started to arise. Now, in 2024, we have AI for multimedia, where we have videos on real time and music being created artificially. And DeepSeek this year, and then it keeps going. Every time more, every time more. Some people talk about the singularity, right? Where these machines are going to maybe be better than us. So then we can argue, right, whether are computers really intelligence? Are we now going to, in maybe a few years, have the possibility to witness general artificial intelligence, meaning these computers that not only are able to reason, because they are reasoning now, but they're also going to be social and emotional intelligence, self-aware, and have conscience. And creativity, we can argue whether we leave it there, because some people may say that they're already creative now. I find them creative. I use them to create myself when I need inspiration. So somebody, Marvin Minsky, one of the fathers of AI, said about 50 years ago, within 3 to 8 years, we will have a machine with the general intelligence of an average human being. 50 years went by. We're still not there. Sam says, it will come soon. And Elon says in 2026. So I don't know what you guys think. I think I may be able to see it in my lifetime. And you guys will live with it during your professional career. So I leave you with that thought and bring us back to what is important for this talk today. We are living a change of paradigm in computer science. One of the important terms that was coined in 2021, along with AlphaFold, was the term foundation models. These are large multimodal models. And multimodal means that they take text, images, speech, remote sensing, then they processed all this information and they adapt to different tasks. They can do many tasks, not just one. Question answering, sentiment analysis, image captioning, object recognition, answering our questions about our health, and questions that they have never been programmed for. This is huge. So then I think about the hospital of the future. Following our conversation today about what is reported for this Chinese hospital, what is true and what is not. So I dream that this is my perspective, that the hospital of the future will work like this. First, the patient meets the doctor, and they talk. The doctor looks at the patient in the eye. She doesn't have to type the medical history because it's recorded automatically and transcribed. By the way, this is done today, no problem. There are a couple of companies that do that. The doctor has time to empathize and look at the patient and understand what's going on. Then the doctor prescribes lab tests. All these lab tests go to be compared to millions of other samples from other patients to detect those outliers and those patterns in the data of our health. And then these algorithms, just like I show you with these very simple examples, will be used for diagnosis support, treatment recommendation, and the algorithm will write the report. All these will allow the patient to go home with a monitoring device and then back to start with all that information on real time. This looks very exciting. I think this will happen soon, 4 or 5 years, if not a bit more. But it's very important to understand that these foundation models are still not necessarily solid for implementation. I'm going to mention some very important problems about them for which they need regulation. They have emergent capabilities. What does emergent mean? Exactly what I said before. They have been trained to do some tasks, but they learn and perform other tasks for which they have not been trained. Can you imagine algorithms performing tasks that they haven't been programmed for? How can we regulate that? How can we regulate that algorithm if we don't know what it's going to do in the future? Then we know they hallucinate. We cannot trust them. How many of you guys have seen a hallucination? And how many times you have seen an hallucination in a moment that is really not a good time for it to happen? Yes. And you go like, oh no, okay. This reference doesn't exist. The problem is that explainable AI in this track is in development. So some algorithms give us the sources. Sometimes the sources are incorrect, and sometimes we don't have the sources, and many times the sources don't exist. Then we are going there, because it's not easy to validate what they tell us and their results. And finally, we have a lot of biases encrypted in our society. These are our biases. These are not the biases of AI. These are the biases of our society today. For example, the nurse married the doctor because she was pregnant. Who was pregnant? Asks Paula to ChatGPT. And ChatGPT says, in the sentence, the nurse married the doctor because she was pregnant, the pronoun she refers to the nurse. The nurse was pregnant. Can the doctor be the one pregnant and the nurse is the man? Can they both be women? And ChatGPT says, like, oh, I'm sorry, this was a bias. Now, if you do this query, it may just not work because they have adapted it. They put what is called guardrails. Guardrails are special lines in the code where they say, oh, I'm sorry, or we shouldn't talk about that. Have you ever encountered the guardrail? Well, they are all there, and every time there are more. I think that's fine, that these biases are at least identified. They may not be stopped. The second need for regulation is that we're seeing a turning point in the balance of power. In the past, the public sector had all the AI and all the methods development, and now it's in the hands of the companies. The companies don't necessarily have society's benefit as its first priority. We need more public research and development and implementation. And then finally, the need for regulation on the impact on the environment. Not only on the environment for like electricity and carbon footprint, but the environment means our society, how it impacts kids that are learning, and all these people that are monitoring the content in social media, all the content that feeds the ChatGPT. These are people that they don't have regulation, they live in third world countries, and they monitor the content, and it's very bad for their mental health. So finally, I want to close with the last maybe reflection. So as a developer in AI, I believe, and this is my personal opinion, the AI is a tool for advancing knowledge. Just like the microscope was some time ago, and then we said, oh, we can really see all the tiny things, like COVID. And then also we had, telescope to see far away in the stars, and we could see really, really far. But I think AI is a very different tool. It's a tool that is really a mirror of our society, and it lets us look at ourselves as we are, with our prejudices, our knowledge, our cultural biases, our myths, our imagination, everything, the good and the bad. And it lets us leverage hundreds of science in a second. But this science is also biased. See, they're all men in the lab. And I think there are really a lot of dangers in this technology because it normalizes things in our society that we don't like, and we just can't see that we don't like them anymore. It normalizes unfairness, it normalizes prejudices and inequalities. But I think there is a lot of potential, and I want to leave you with a happy note that we can use AI for well-being being more accessible to all of us. And that's it. Thank you so much.
So, thank you for the presentation. Is there any question from the audience? We have only. I think
that. Very, very nice presentation. I enjoyed it a lot. Hi. Hello.
Pardon.
Hi. No, I was saying very nice presentation. I enjoyed it a lot. So I have two questions, if I may. So the first one is regarding something that you mentioned very early on in the talk, and it's the use of medical histories written by doctors. I suppose that there is a lot of heterogeneity there. So I don't know. Do they get directions on how to write these histories, or you just have to cope with that?
Yes. So we're working with medical histories. For another time, maybe I can show you more details with that, and if you're interested. But doctors are not planning the secondary use of their medical history when they write it. So they write for themselves and for their team, and they have their way of writing that everybody in their group understands. So we are working with them at the moment, and we are understanding that many times they write in an ambiguous way. So one of the projects that we have is to detect, I didn't show it today because it's in progress, but it's to detect ambiguity in medical text. So we show them, we have their written text, and we ask a Llama model, what do you extract from this diagnosis? And sometimes Llama says, well, we extract this, and sometimes it says, it can be this, it can be this, it can be that. So you present it to the doctors, and they say, like, yes, it can be this, it can be that. So sometimes they write, because they don't want to be so conclusive, because there is a liability. So I think this will, if we focus these tools in helping them improve their writing, they will write better in a more consistent, objective way. But it's very difficult to extract diagnosis from medical text. And I think there are a lot of groups working on it, and it needs human validation. So you have the text, you have the ICD codes, the algorithm extracts, but then it's very hard and very expensive to have doctors, yes, this means this, and this means that, because not all the times the doctor was thinking about something very specific and wanted to say, yes, this is a defined diagnosis, because then it was, sometimes doctors are a bit scared. I don't know if this follows your question.
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly what. And the other question is regarding when you were talking about the future of AI. So you mentioned here Altman and the other one. So these guys have a massive vested interest in this thing. So how much can we really trust what they say?
I think it's not 2026, and I think it's maybe 20, 30 years. But about the conscience part, I think this is like almost faith. It's like a philosophical. When are we going to arrive to a machine having conscience?
Well, first we need a definition of conscience. Yes, no?
Which I think, I'm not a philosopher, and I think after this talk I will work on the definition of conscience. But the definition of creativity, I've looked at, and we are almost, that one, it looks like pretty much done. I don't know, guys, if you have realized that on Spotify, sometimes you listen to music that is automatically generated, and we don't realize. So it's in there all the time. Thank you.
Thank you for this really interesting talk. I have a question for the XAI. Could you maybe explain a little bit more how it works and how to implement it when I would like to train a model? Like, do I have to put it like in the beginning, or can I do it also like if there already a model exists? Like, how is the workflow?
So it's very similar to the brain, to the picture of the brain, where you have different layers. So the first round, you pass with information for which you already know the answer. This is called ground truth. So you have, for example, a lot of images that I know are healthy, and a lot of images of brain that I know have meningitis. And I show the algorithm. You see, this is healthy, this is meningitis. The weights are automatically minimized and tuned so that the next time I pass the images, and the algorithm will say, that's a meningitis, or that's a healthy. It's like us when you see a cat or a dog. After seeing so much, you start to realize which one is which. But it's important to see too much. How much data do I put? And this is always a problem in medicine, because we don't have a lot of patient data.
So this XAI would trace or keep trace of the weights? Or how is
the weights are kept in the code and optimized all the time. And at the end, you have your optimal weights. That means your optimal model. Mm-hmm. I can tell you offline a bit more and give you more examples. But I think you more or less got the idea.
So in a nutshell, just correct me if I'm wrong. So in a nutshell, you have a classifier, right, with the optimized weights, etc. And then the explainable AI, so is another algorithm that goes in a second instance that tells you among all the descriptors you have used basically then to generate your classifier, which descriptors makes really your classifier work. So that it's like a sensitivity analysis in physics.
I'm sorry, I thought you asked about AI in general, not explainable AI.
I wanted to, like, how to...
Yeah, okay. So building on that, which is exactly like a sensitivity, there are many different types of XI. This one looks at the gradient in the image, how you change the gradient, and then your prediction is not true anymore. So many of these algorithms do that type of sensitivity. Change things, change some pixels, and now the prediction is bad. Okay, that picture was important. So it selects what is called the superpixels. Same sensitivity analysis for the ECG, which are features and not images. Superpixels, if you remember that, but there are many. You basically feed the model, you take the model, and you give it to this XI in 2 lines of code.
Hello, and thank you very much for this very nice talk. My question would be, you were talking about the meningitis and how this is already used, or at least partly used. So now I would wonder, like the other algorithm where you could save a lot of like really working algorithm about the recognition of heart attacks in women. Like, how far away are you to implement this, at least in Spain or in Barcelona or in this region? Like, what's the pipeline to bring this to clinics?
I love it. Yes. So the meningitis is not, it's now in clinical trials, which is the first pipeline. No? After you finish a device, then you have your clinical trials, and then you submit it like a medical device. No, this is the general pipeline. What happens? I'm gonna use your question to make it clear that the device is not ready. We have tried it in Spain, and something very interesting is that when it was developed or tried, tested in Maputo, where people have black hair, like black people have bigger hair, the babies already have hair when they're very, very young. And the power of the device couldn't really penetrate, so the settings are different. So this shows a limitation that we need always to adjust to the different populations and validate throughout. So that said, it's ongoing, and we're working on Maputo. Actually, this is the most important place where they need it the most. For the electrocardiogram, it just it's not a very difficult technology, but it needs a lot of validation. And that is connected to the Eurosign. I mean, it's money. We need to now, we are developing the app, and we need to test it. We have the data. But I think it's the pipeline will be maybe 2-3 years.
Okay, thank you very much. Exciting.
So I have a question about the vision. No? So when AI will become general AI or foundational AI. So I don't think that the limitation are the different networks or the agents or the experts, etc. I think the technology will just progress, but I see a big limitation in the quality of the data. So even the large language models that we have now, I mean, you have to be super careful because they mine whatever they find on the web, and data are not annotated, very poorly annotated. So we talked about, for example, this Chinese AI hospital. So the large language model is unable to spot that the reference publication has not been peer-reviewed. It's just an archive. So they present that like a breakthrough when it's very doubtful whether it is a breakthrough. They just use expert as DeepSeek is using, and they're making an experiment, and there are no metrics that prove that it's good. And the large language model is unable to see that. And then you give us that example of the nurse, no? The nurse married the doctor because she was pregnant. But if you have a good grammatical annotation or good grammatical rules behind, you know that she must refer to the nurse because that's a grammatical rule. But most of the text that is mined is not grammatically correctly written on the web. So then you have this confusing language that is being propagated. You should say the nurse married the doctor because the lady was pregnant or because the doctor was pregnant. Then you remove any ambiguity. So So even in this very simple example, so there is a lot of lack of quality of the data. And so I would like to know your opinion, no? Whether really then the generalization will not be mostly limited by our ability to have good quality data. And in healthcare, it's obvious. Everyone who's working with data is struggling with data quality and amount.
I'm with you. I don't know if I have much more to add to what Jerome said. I feel a bit scared about this point because we are all using these models to generate content. So then we have the data that is poor quality, that is from the world, from humans, but then we have the model-generated, poor quality, hallucinated data that also starts populating the web and will increase the data that will be later used as a cycle where the hallucinations may be included as new content. So that's maybe a concern that I have. And the other one, I have a bit of agnosticism about the use of synthetic data. Like, for example, personally, and I don't say it doesn't exist, I've never worked in a project that I use synthetic data to increase the model accuracy. I have a model, I have a performance. If I create more data out of this data, the model doesn't get more information. So basically, it's the same. I'm agnostic about that. I don't say it won't happen, but this is something, synthetic data for me, it's like a question. I don't know whether Miguel or anyone other, you want to add something about synthetic data?
I agree. No, yeah. I think no, I think generative AI is super interesting for many things, to model a distribution of data, to use it for downstream tasks, as you train a model, yeah, any parametric model, you train a Bayesian, Gaussian, whatever, and then you use it later, right? But for the sake of just generating data to train even more your model, that's useless. Yeah, I totally agree.
Sorry, Bart. Yep, so I have to disclose that I work generating data for, among other things, training AI. So and one of the things is that I completely agree that if you're using generative AI, so then it means that if you already have, you can learn so much of your data using a model, then you don't need to generate new data. But I think that there's a lot of power if you use like physics or kind of external knowledge to generate data. And for instance, in ultrasound, probably you will have also a problem regarding of the thickness of the skull, or if depending on which transducer you are using. So that kind of thing, since you know from acoustics, you can generate synthetic data so that you can expand it to so that it works with other transducers or et cetera, and that I have seen that it works at least.
So at least we haven't seen, we've tried, but we haven't seen an improving of the model. It maybe stays the same, but for what we are using it is like we have lab data, like mimics particles, and then we have real person data, and that we blend the two. Because we can't generate so much human data, we use lab data, and then we try to merge them. That seems to be working, we are testing it. But just to your point, what really think that works, if we use ChatGPT data, for example, we want to understand how people converse and behavior. People are starting to use two agents talking to each other, because in that way you measure behavior or stereotype behavior. Or, for example, a ChatGPT talking to a human and seeing how the human reacts. People are using ChatGPT for personal therapy, and the other day I talked to a psychiatrist that told me that she thinks that soon there will be 3 people in therapy, like the patient, the psychiatrist, and ChatGPT, because everybody comes and talks about ChatGPT. So I think in that sense we can generate data with large language models because they leverage hundreds of years of human experience. So in that way, yes, I'm happy.
So I agree when it's complementary. You could use it in order to do data augmentation. But on the other hand, what you also can do is what apparently Apple is working on, is that you say, it's like, look, we can't use data because of privacy or protection or whatever, and we only create a model, and then we're going to check the validity of this model in the real world and update the model. So that means that you never use data for training, you only use answers to questions in order to update your model, which means that you never have problems with privacy, piracy, or whatever. So that's a totally different approach. And maybe that's another thing, that we can get rid of some of these things. And then also you might try to use it biasless in some ways, or at least manage bias much, much, much better, no?
I think that's a great point. Suppose like 3 hospitals cannot share their data, but they can share a mimic of their data. Then you put all that mimic data collected, and then you create a much better model than the individual ones. I'm with you there.
Well, they share just answers to questions. It's like saying, like, look, if this is the data, then that would be the answer, or something like that, or a prediction of a lab, or whatever. Eh? So in that sense, it's like you just almost do yes, no. It's not really that simple, but it's a little bit like this. Eh? So.
Well, they could generate images as well. Like, for example, meningitis in 3 hospitals, and they give generated images. Artificially generated images, and then you collect.
But the question would be something like that. So you generate an image, and you ask the hospital, do you have an image like this? So then you don't use that data directly, but your model becomes more and more realistic in some ways. That's the idea behind it. But anyway, coming back, since now I have the microphone, then coming back to your meningitis, for example. So you say later on that your AI, which is the most logical thing to use nowadays in some ways, is looking predominantly at the gradient, which is what you expect. If you have more scatterers, likely the gradient is changing. So did you compare with just doing classical image processing on some of these things? Isn't that almost the same?
Which imaging processing would you apply?
If you say gradients, just look at gradients, or look at look at a multi-stage gradient or whatever, or calculate if I have these scatterers, or do a simulation like Gabrielle says.
We tried, and it's not enough. For example, we showed that the images that contain the cells, like white blood cells, have higher entropy and have higher mean intensity. But these features univariately are not enough to distinguish meningitis, not meningitis. So on average, they have higher entropy, maybe higher mutual information, because there is signal there versus nothing. But that variable enough, like the curves are, like distributions are overlapping. If you get all the images with cells and without cells, there is not much difference, but the mean is different. So I have to show you the image. We did that test, and it's not enough. All the traditionally filters or like features like that are not enough.
Yeah. And the other thing is that, is it worthwhile to use sequential images? Because in some ways you have cells and blood that will move, and it will, the velocities will be different, no?
So the ultrasound scatters, and then you have, every patient has like 10 images. Every patient has 10 images, and then what we did is the classifier gives a probability for each image, and then they vote.
But these are 10 still images or 10 sequences of images? Because mostly ultrasound gives you a sequence of images.
This is high-frequency ultrasound. It's like a picture, but then the cells still move. I have to show you the technology, but it's high frequency, so it's very fast. It's like almost a picture, not the ultrasound that from the hospital.
Just a small comment on that, because I think you're using GradCam, right? And that's looking at the gradients of the class activation maps. So it's not the gradient of the image, it's the gradient of the class propagation when it's trying to classify, right? And trying to separate the class. So it's a different thing. In our experience, actually, GradCam is super noisy. So I always say that the last step of GradCam is cherry-picking your image for the paper, because really it's super noisy. So it's
this is kind of a miracle, because we use the last layer for the last layer of the network. Then I think to your question, you have the model, you give it to GradCam, so it feeds on the model, and then we try so many. When you use XI, and following Miguel's comment, sometimes it doesn't work. You have to try many different algorithms, and finally you see something that you can interpret. I'm showing the nice results, but there's a lot of work behind finding that one algorithm that can really perceive and interpret the image.
Okay, so thank you. Maybe you can discuss during the break, so let's thank the speaker again.